Captain Jaffa's orange grows. Microchips is us. iPhone cameras us. Taco salads us. Vamos us. Olive Garden us. White Claws for us. Sabra Hamas. Hasbara sus.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Bad Hasbara,
the world's most moral podcast.
Thank you so much. My name is Matt Lieb. I am your world's most moral co-host.
And I'm Daniel Mate, and I'm the mirror image of that. I'm the other most moral co-host. How you doing, Matt?
I'm doing good. I'm excited. It's the holidays. Everything is filled with cheer. There's one thing that the holidays are known for. It's that magical cheer.
Yeah, everyone's happy.
Everyone's happy. No one's unhappy except for all of the children who are crying at all times, wanting toys that they can't get because Papa can't afford everything. You know, Papa can only afford so many things, Daniel.
Why are you even assuming Papa's around? What if it's Mama who can't afford it?
Oh, yeah. Sometimes
some children are crying for Papa.
That's true. My child specifically cries for me. I mean, when it comes to the toy buying thing, and I can't do it. I can't do it all the time. You know, here's the thing about Santa. He's not real. He doesn't have elves. If he did, that is slave labor. And I would immediately start a campaign to get him arrested by the ICJ. You know what I mean?
I'm imagining like Orlando Bloom as Legolas at Legolas at Legoland. The elf, you know,
the elf Legoland, yes.
Yeah. The Tolkien elf.
Legoland. You're imagining him putting toys together.
Yeah. It's very beneath him.
Yeah, no, this dude should, he should be, in Rivendell with all of his other elf homies trying to fight off, Sauron so they can destroy the Ring of Power. He's not here to make toys for you, Karina, just because you're little and cute. That's right. These guys have magic. They live forever. They can go at any point to the Undying Lands. But they choose not to because they want to fight for Middle Earth. Do you like Lord of the Rings?
I remember liking about 1.5 of the 3 movies.
Okay.
A lot.
Yeah.
I never saw the Hobbit trilogy. It's totally unnecessary.
Yeah, it didn't need to be a trilogy. No. Anyway, shout out to Tolkien. Good stuff. Hope you keep writing more. Also, shout out to producer Adam Levin, out here on the ones and twos, writing things down, displaying them on screen, having them read by us. Please subscribe on YouTube and all of the podcast apps and give us, all the stars and reviews and everything. YouTube.com/@BadHasbara, or, just go to YouTube, type in Bad Hasbara. Well, whatever way you subscribe, please do it. And you can also subscribe on those podcast apps. It will automatically download the episode every time it comes out. And that way you don't even have to search for it. It just shows up. Today's episode is brought to you by Doctors Without Borders. Doctors Without Borders teams provide specialized medical services in Gaza, including comprehensive care for burns and traumatic injury, surgery, physiotherapy, psychological support, occupational therapy, and health education. Just today, 12 team members and their families were surrounded by bombing and heavy shooting, as were 30 others at the Doctors Without Borders offices, causing a hospital closure in Al-Mawasi. This is a much more worthy cause. They're much more worthy of your money than our Patreon. So please, before you subscribe to the Patreon, consider going to doctorswithoutborders.org and donating some money. They do need it.
Subscribing to our Patreon is your dessert, but
exactly.
Have your protein first.
Yeah, you can't have your pudding without donating some meat. Please donate your meat to...
And don't go to countrywithoutborders.org, because that's just Israel's website.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Please also join the Patreon if you can. Patreon.com/badhasbara. You can join for, $5, and you can get all of the episodes, the bonus episodes that we do, and you get everything early. Or you can subscribe for free And you don't really get anything, but you do get occasional updates, and you get told about episodes that are coming out that you might be interested in, listening to, and maybe you will someday choose to subscribe, but you don't have to.
You get to like come into the front lobby of the clubhouse. You can't come into the actual meeting room, but you can hang out in the mud room where everyone leaves their shoes and like listen, put your ear at the door and try to listen to what's going on there for all the members. But what did happen last week on Patreon? I actually missed the Patreon episode.
Oh, yes.
I was busy with an event, but you had our friend Raphael Shimunov on.
That's right. We were on, the Patreon feed, and we talked about Luigi. Luigi, what's his last name?
Luigi's Mangione.
Mangione. We talked about Richie Torres, and also we talked about the this ad that some people have been getting for the UJA Federation of New York.
They've been getting it on our feed.
Yes, they've been getting it on our feed. We've been getting a bunch of messages going like, hey, I don't know if you guys know this, but like when you take a commercial break from your your anti-Hasbara podcast, a commercial for the UJA comes on. And I don't know if you know this, but maybe you should talk to your hosting website about this. And I thought about doing that. I thought about like, contacting our podcast host and being like, how do we stop this? But then I was like, what's funnier is to just do an episode about them. and
really hope that the ad gets placed on that episode. I saw an ad on our Rashid Khalidi episode. Because I never remember what the hell we talk about. So sometimes I like to go back and actually watch the episodes. Apparently that was a spicy one. They got a lot of people talking.
Spicy.
We'll talk about that sometime.
Talking about it. Yeah.
But I was watching it on my girlfriend's laptop, and she doesn't have a YouTube subscription. So ads kept popping up in the middle of the conversation. And this one ad that kept playing, I had to watch it twice to make sure I wasn't hearing things, was a masterclass, like one of these masterclasses.
Yeah, I love
with 3 former CIA spooks teaching you like management and team building secrets gleaned from years in the CIA, which is really funny given that we were talking about Syria and the overthrow of the Assad regime. And that one of the big points of contention in that whole discourse is to what extent do we credit
the CIA was involved,
the CIA involvement in the dirty war and ruining the country in the past 15 years. Anyway, it was I thought that was some real chutzpah on the CIA's part to like get in there.
It's also amazing to me that what the CIA seems to be teaching in that masterclass is like how to succeed in business. It's like
team building tactics I learned from killing Patrice Lumumba. This producer Adam.
that
lean in.
That is so funny. The CIA is just, it's like we got this master class by a prince named Machiavelli. he's going to teach you how to succeed in business while really trying, but looking like you're not trying.
You really want to be listening closely.
Yes.
Really listen to what people are saying.
Yeah.
Here's how to tap their phone.
With a recording device. Oh, that's great. But yeah, so that was a really fun episode. Raf was great. And we were able to kind of get to the bottom of what exactly UJA is. So if you want to listen to that, go to patreon.com/BadHasbara. Daniel, can you inform me what the spin is?
Well, I'll certainly do my best, Matt. You might see behind me, I got some pink crates. From my moving company just arrived today because I'm moving. This is going to be one of my last episodes in this location.
No.
I'm moving up to bigger and better things.
Nice.
This place has served me well, but I've got an album here by Brownie McGee and Sonny Terry, blues duo, legendary, and they have a song called "Packing Up, Getting Ready to Go," which is what I'm doing. I've got "To Pimp a Butterfly" by Kendrick Lamar.
Oh, beautiful!
Because ever since that Rashid Khalidi episode was released and people started clipping it, and like serious scholars started like posting it and debating him and debating back and forth, like Arab on Arab discourse basically happening in really, really smart ways on Twitter, like
Yes.
way beyond me. People talking about, what I've had in my head is Syria is complicated. Syria is complicated. Syria is complicated.
That's amazing.
That's what's been in my head. And speaking of that, the Beatles' White Album, which has one version of their song, their sort of ambivalent revolution song. You say you want a revolution. I'm not telling anyone how to feel about this one, but Israel sure knows how it feels about the overthrow of the Assad government. They've been going to town and destroying that town over and over again. And it is certainly complicated. And we appreciate
people have
it.
a lot of thoughts about it.
A lot of thoughts about it. And we have a lot of space between our ears.
Yes,
where thoughts should be. And then finally, I got this album by Brooklyn underground hip hop legend LP of Run the Jewels fame.
Yes.
The album Cancer for Cure, which has a song called Drones Over Brooklyn.
Beautiful.
Well, close enough. It's Drones Over Jersey this week.
Yeah, that's right. LP, the former guest of Pod Yourself a Gun, the world's only Sopranos podcast.
LP came on Pod Yourself a Gun, you lucky motherfucker.
Yeah, that was our biggest. That's got to be by far our biggest guest. It was the funniest thing ever to be in a room. We went to him and recorded an episode about some episode of The Sopranos.
Oh my
God. Think I was so nervous the whole time. I don't even remember what was said. And I bet it's not one of our most popular episodes in terms of content, because I probably was just like, do you like The Sopranos? Over and over again. I do too. Let's be friends. He is
easily in my top 2 or 3 rapper producers of all time.
He's incredible. And super nice guy, super funny guy. And hey dude, if you're listening, I do this podcast too.
And he's my age, and he got huge in his 40s, with Run the Jewels.
Beautiful.
It's a story of sticking true to your stuff, even when you're underground for a long, long time.
Age ain't nothing but a number, sort of. Let me pretend I never said that.
That's right.
So that's what the spin is. And Daniel, I'd like to spin one more thing before we move on, because we have a lot of content.
This is
just so much. No, I got what you're doing. We're gonna spin something that you made, because I don't know if people know this, but Israel and Ireland no longer best. They're no longer best friends. They never were, but
just one too many Tig Hickey men on street playing different country videos, huh?
Yeah,
I just couldn't take it anymore. Hope you're happy, Tig.
Yeah, Tig, you really listen. I understand that you're into politics and stuff, but you have ruined the relationship between Israel and Ireland, 2 of the oldest friends in the world. These 2 countries have been besties since the beginning of time, and now you have gone and destroyed the relationship. It's like watching my parents break up. In the Lieb family home, it is Ireland versus Israel, and now I have to sit there and go, there's no more Israel office. What do you call that? Embassy.
So they were so sad, because they're right next to each other in the alphabet of.
I know, alphabet of countries. You can't say one without the other, I think, probably. But just let me read this tweet real quick, kind of explaining what happened from, what is it, Gideon Saar? Saar. All right. Today, I have instructed the closure of Israel's embassy in Ireland. The actions, double standards, and anti-Semitic rhetoric of the Irish government against Israel are rooted in efforts to delegitimize and demonize the Jewish state. The Irish government recognized a, quote, Palestinian state during attacks on Israel, a move praised by Hamas, attempted to redefine, quote, genocide in international law to support baseless claims against Israel at the ICJ, backed politically motivated cases at the ICC, promoted anti-Israel measures within the EU, and fostered hostility toward Israel. Notably, Ireland is one of the few European countries that has not adopted the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism. That's the one that makes it so that criticizing Israel is anti-Semitic. And its
That's the one that makes it that the 2 of us plus our guest are anti-Semites.
Yeah, exactly. You know, that fair definition that everyone should adopt. And its government has failed to take effective measures to combat the surge of anti-Semitism within Ireland. Israel will focus its resources on strengthening bilateral relations with countries worldwide, according to priorities that also take into account the attitudes and actions of these states towards Israel.
You know what I heard Ireland was planning to do next?
What?
And this is unprecedented.
What?
You know how Hanukkah's coming up, right?
It sure is.
Latkes.
Christmas Day.
Latkes. Ireland was going to ban potatoes.
Oh my God. Just to get back at the Jews?
Just to get back at the Jews.
This is just, it's sickening and disgusting. And I have a little something that Daniel, you sung this beautiful song in support.
No Lucky Charms this Purim.
In support.
Yeah, I did a little ditty. We'll play just a verse of it. This is my imagination of, when I was in Ireland, I actually saw Tig sing the original version of this song, The Parting Glass, at a pub event in Cork. And it's, many Irish events, pub nights will end with this song. It's sort of this wistful goodbye toast called The Parting Glass. So I just wrote a version of it for the Israelis to sing on their way out.
Yeah.
Of all the homes that e'er I bombed, I have bombed them out of self-defense. Oh, and all the children that e'er I killed, it was, alas, at my expense. We can never forgive them for making us kill them. I've tried my best to explain myself, but my best efforts were doomed to stall. So close for me, my embassy. Good night, goodbye, and feck you all.
So there's more to that you can listen to the full version of the song at the end of the episode. Beautiful rendition.
Thank you, laddie.
I hope that whiskey tasted good.
It was actually, it's like very, very expired wine, like a little bit of, because I'm moving out and I've got all this old shit in my fridge. So I poured some white, a few drops of red to make it look as whiskey-like as I could.
Look at this. You're doing movie magic.
I don't have any Irish whiskey on hand. Yeah, it was a practical effect.
Well, it was beautiful. And yeah, listen to that full song. And we're going to have to do a full episode on Ireland v. Israel at some point, because once again, I love the Irish. God bless the beautiful land of Ireland. And without further ado, I want to talk about something and then bring in our guest today.
Without further ado, I just want to do a little bit more ado.
There's more content before guests. All right. We're doing our best, guys. We're trying to get this podcast going.
All right, no more delays.
No more delays. One more delay.
Here's the preamble.
Yes. So to introduce our guest, we have a nice segue that goes into guest, and it is a tweet by Shoshana, who's just random person on Twitter. This segment is called, you talked about Kendrick Lamar in honor of him. Shoshana don't want to go to school no more. A student over at Columbia tweeted this recently. I considered majoring in Middle East studies, but nearly all of the prerequisite courses at Columbia are taught by anti-Semites. Every time I register for classes, I cross-reference the course directory with Canary Mission. It's 2024, not 1939. Jewish students shouldn't have to avoid classes for fear of discrimination. And then she tags at Campus Jew Hate, at Ed Workforce Committee, at, of course, Representative Stefanik, at Richie Torres, at Shabbos K. And so
her name sounds like it sounds made up. Shoshana Aufsehen.
Yeah, Aufsehen.
It sounds like it's made. It sounds like it's from some like Tarantino style fake 1939.
Yeah.
I guess it's a real German.
I'm sure it is, but it does sound like her name is Shoshana Judenhaus. And these are the classes sections that she posted, and it's all the instructor is Joseph Massad.
Wasn't he the
Massad,
guy that Barry Weiss tried to cancel?
yes, Barry Weiss and the whole like Hasbara network, of right wing psychopaths and their supporters in Congress and in Washington, had been trying to get this guy fired and canceled, and instead of that, he is instead getting more classes because he is a professor. And
Because he's hot and they are not.
He's hot, they're not, and they're mad about it. And these are all sections for I think the same lecture that he teaches, and this is someone who is being called an anti-Semite because he wrote this article for the Electronic Intifada on October 8th, Just Another Battle or the Palestine War of Liberation, in which he talks about the occupation of Gaza and the 16-year-long siege, and rightfully points out that Hamas is a resistance force and not just a wily terrorist organization, which is the way they're portrayed by Hasbaras and their proxies in the media. And so, of course, he's being attacked, by people, not just like people online, but people with power, which seems to be the thing about academics who are being targeted, is that they are not just targeted the same way, say, you and me are targeted. They are targeted, like there are hearings in Congress about anti-Semitism in schools. And that brings us to our guest. We have a fantastic guest. So excited for everyone to hear our conversation here with the writer, anti-Zionist, and recently fired tenured professor at Muhlenberg College. Ladies and gentlemen and everyone else, please welcome to the podcast, Maura Finkelstein.
Hi, it's so nice to be here.
So
Hello.
great to have you. We are excited to speak with you about what's going on first of all, what's going on in colleges in general and what happened with you.
Well, can I first tell you a quick story
please.
To link to your last story? Mm-hmm. So I cut my teeth with campus anti-Zionist organizing 20 years ago when I was a master's student at Columbia because of the attacks on Joseph Massad. So this has been going on for a very long time. But I think my introduction to repression on campus was at Columbia because of a round of attacks that were against Joseph.
Full circle.
So Joseph has been being attacked for a long, long time because he speaks about Israel in a way that is too closely mirrors the truth about what Israel is. This seems to be, it's interesting because you see a lot of attacks on college professors, and I've seen this, for a long time. Does this moment feel different? Does this feel like, maybe 20 years or more of work that has gone into trying to delegitimize academics who fight for, not even just fight for Palestinian rights, but like correctly put out a narrative of what Israel is and what political Zionism is, and they're getting attacked for it?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we're talking a lot about this moment, and I think that that's really important. And the headline around me has been like, first tenured professor fired over Palestine activism and writing and whatnot. And that's only since October 7th, 2023. So we have Stephen Slada in 2014. So I think, what we're seeing now is a sort of like massive attack on faculty that in the past has mostly been, I think, targeting Palestinian faculty members, Arab and Muslim faculty members. And now, we Jews can also be evil anti-Semites.
Right.
Well, hell, you're not even the first Finkelstein. If we include people not getting tenure in the first place, you're the first to lose it. But 20 years ago, right now, speaking of 20 years ago, at DePaul, there was a certain other Finkelstein who was getting denied tenure because of similar stuff. First of all, have you considered changing your last name to Finkelstein, no relation? I mean, and then secondly, who is the common ancestor here? What was it in the Finkelstein line or Finkelstein that ended up with so many Mensches and Menchettes when it comes to the being on the right side of this historical divide?
Well, I mean, I will say I've known about Norman Finkelstein for a really long time and felt, proud to be of no relation, but in the struggle with him. But a few months ago, folks on Twitter started referring to me as Nepo baby. And I was like, what? What's happening? And then I was like, oh, yeah.
They all think you're Norman's daughter or something. That is
But
amazing.
I think it was I've heard a lot of stories, but the one that I think is probably true is that it was a really common name given to folks at Ellis Island. I think that there was somebody who was like, I like this name. I'm just going to give it to everyone whose last name I don't actually like, which sounds right to me.
That's crazy that there's literally just generations upon generations of people who just had the name of some dude at Ellis Island was just like, I don't know, let's say Lieberman. You look like a Lieberman. I don't know, just like some guy who's like he got a list of like Goldsteins, Silversteins. Yeah, just whole generations of people who just have fake names.
Now the night
you're Romanian. Let's give you a German name. That sounds
yeah,
right.
Exactly. Like, I can't pronounce that.
Right. So the night I met you was at an event for Rafat Al-Harir's book, and he was there as well. Did you have the two of you?
We met for the first time that night, actually.
At that night, what was that like?
Yeah, it was really nice to finally meet him.
Yeah.
He's
a bit awkward in person.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we probably don't always have the same politics, but I think it's really important to sort of widen the circle of everyone who's fighting for, at the end of the day, the right thing.
That's been a major theme of this past year, I think, for many of us. That and this podcast has been a place where people who may have disagreements are coming to occupy the same stage for basically the same cause.
Yeah, I mean, there's a common denominator that that we all talk about here, which is the liberation of Palestine, that allows for us to have diverging opinions, at least on all sorts of other things, as long as you're not a racist. That's pretty much the one thing.
One would think that would be a low bar, and yet
it used to be. I used to think it would be. But let's get into your story, because I'm fascinated by this as someone who doesn't know anything about the world of academia. I mean, I went to UC Santa Cruz, but I don't remember it. So I don't know. I don't exactly know what tenure is. I know that tenure is when you can't get. It's a lot harder to fire staff. Is that right?
It sounds like something you should get after 10 years.
Right? Yeah.
I'm a tenured professor.
Yeah, exactly. I was here for 10 years, and so I get tenure. Yeah.
And academics have to keep things not making sense, so it's usually 7 years.
Yeah. See.
But
and then you have to take a sabbatical.
Exactly.
Yeah, if you're lucky.
Whatever.
I mean, I think that most, a lot of universities now are trying to destroy both tenure and sabbaticals, but that's another thing. But tenure is kind of, in theory, not always in practice, a way to actually protect academic freedom that
right.
In theory. In practice, a lot of times tenure is about rewarding people for, keeping their head down and participating in the status quo. Because the thing I was always told before I got tenure was, don't be too political, don't talk about Palestine, don't write about Palestine, don't teach about Palestine until after you get tenure, which of course is so you do that for 7 years and then you just keep doing the same thing that you're doing. Right. But the idea behind tenure was that we're going to have, let's just say as an idea, administrations that maybe don't support the proliferation of ideas. So in order to keep your president from firing you if you're publishing things that they don't think align with their politics, you have tenure so you can keep doing that work without getting fired. I mean, now we're seeing not only that most faculty are contingent faculty, so they're adjuncts, they're lecturers, they don't have even the opportunity to come up for tenure, but they are also on, 1 to 3 year contracts. They can be terminated at any time. And so it's a much more precarious workforce. But for the 30%, I think, of college and university faculty who are on the tenure track or are tenured, the idea is that, once you get tenure, you can be more provocative. You can, put yourself in leadership roles that might go up against the administration. And what we're seeing college and university administrations do is attack faculty outside of the world of faculty governance and instead have these secret black box procedures in which you have administrators just, banning faculty from their offices, like at NYU, or in my case, getting fired based on a Title VI complaint, instead of allowing for faculty governance, which is where a panel of our peers determine these things. So there's a total breakdown of what even tenure could be on
even
that
in the
level.
good old days. Do you think that that tenure, that process of keep your head down and your mouth shut until you get tenure, do you think that served a kind of a filtering function of, those who couldn't hack that or filter it out of the system, and those who can will eventually get habituated to keeping their mouths shut and get comfy with, I'm thinking of the sort of, the Chomskyan propaganda model in media of
Right.
if you had dissenting opinions, you wouldn't be sitting in the seat that you're in once you're a CNN host. So do you think there's something about that function as a way to sort of in a kind of soft power kind of way, enforce conformity and like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, in the good old days, it was just white men and some white women, only a few, who would even make it to that level to begin with. So yeah, absolutely. It's
interesting to me as my dad was a high school teacher, a public school teacher, and he was also, he used to be a conservative, and I mean, he still holds some tendencies like that. But then as soon as he got a job with a union, he was just like, you know what, unions are really important, because they were the only people who supported teachers. It was, everyone else was trying to fire teachers for a myriad of reasons, right? But the union was what was keeping teachers employed and also living with a stable income. Is tenure a function of a union at all, or is it just kind of something that's been implemented across academia, by actual, colleges themselves?
I think the unions are separate. I mean, tenure, I think, was sort of the norm at most colleges and universities. I mean, we're seeing in Texas that tenure is basically being abolished, and that will probably spread to Florida and wherever else. My experience, because I've only ever taught at small private colleges, in which as an adjunct at a college that doesn't exist anymore, Mills College, we were unionizing contingent faculty. So within these private colleges, tenured track and tenured faculty couldn't be unionized, but adjuncts can unionize. So it's almost like a completely separate monster or animal or whatnot. But what I've experienced visiting some universities over the past few months is that at schools with, especially public universities with a robust union, faculty, regardless of tenure, are much safer because they have the union advocating for them if the union is willing to take on that work. So there are different models, but they operate in different ways for different people.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about what happened, because the story made headlines because of the fact that you were tenured. It was just, people were shocked. Were you shocked to find out that they were actually going to follow through and terminating you.
And let's get into their reasons for doing
yeah,
so.
and why?
Yeah.
What anti-Semitic things did you do?
You must have typed up and came up with something on your own and posted something really.
Did you write a manifesto, like a Nazi manifesto? Is that what you did?
If only it would have made their job. It would have made their job so much easier,
Yes.
because I think the thing about this.
Did you write on someone's final paper, "You should hang your Jew head in shame"?
Well, actually, I
marker?
think one of the worst things that I did was write an essay called "Never Again Means Never Again for Anyone," and
my God.
I know
Anyone? That's rather extreme, Maura.
What does that mean? That could mean anything.
Monsters, yeah.
Monster.
I mean, I will say, like, I think what happened to me is going to be more and more common. I don't think that this is an anomaly, but I think the fact that it happened in the way that it happened is entirely because I worked at a college that has a very, very, very strong and powerful Hillel. And so much of the surveillance and accusations against me were coming from both Hillel staff and students in Hillel leadership. But basically, starting after October 7th, 2023, I teach about Palestine in all of my classes, almost all of my classes. And so it would have been...
You teach anthropology, yes?
I do. I'm an
Okay, so
anthropology professor.
I'm just gonna bookmark. I want to come back to a question about what's the connection to all your classes.
Yeah.
And I can talk about that, especially because, one of the things that got me in trouble with my teaching is that I don't teach both sides, as though that's a real thing.
Yeah.
But I opened up space for my students to actually email me questions they had about the events of October 7th and the historical context that led to that moment, because I knew that they would probably be scared and nervous to ask these questions in class.
Right.
And so I went into my classes and I answered their questions, which was all about, what's the historical context? How do we understand this outside of a vacuum? And a student in who was taking both of my classes filed a complaint against my teaching that ended up not going anywhere. It never became a formal complaint because there was nothing to, move forward with that. But that just sort of set off a series of events in which the college, from about mid-October until December, were just sort of like looking for anything they could to, get upset with me about my publication. So particularly this essay in which I said nobody should be the victim of genocide. Which, I thought was like one of the least controversial things that I've ever said. To, stuff I was posting on social media. I sort of had to defend the fact that, that this is a genocide is not my opinion. Zionist students can have the opinion that it's not genocide, but there's actually, reality and scholarship backing up the claim that this is genocide. And so it was just sort of a series of basically harassment on the part of the administration towards me, being fueled by students in Hillel who felt unsafe with me on campus because I'm very scary.
To be clear, you mentioned there's one student who made a complaint. Since then, did other students come forward who were actually students in your class, or were these generated outside of your class by people either at the school's Hillel, or even more so outside of the school period?
Yeah, both. And I will say that the student who filed the complaint from inside my class also identifies as a proud Zionist and was preparing to move to Israel after graduation. So
there we go.
Very clear on that student's political, grounding. And even then, that student did not want to continue on with a formal complaint against me. But everything else was, I think 17 students in Hillel who filed complaints, none of whom I had ever met.
Right.
And then what happened in January is that a student that I still to this day have never met, who was in Hillel leadership, encouraged by the staff at Hillel, filed under Title VI, filed an equal opportunity non-discrimination policy violation complaint against me. So this is basically the argument that we're seeing across our campuses, equating Zionism with Judaism and trying to make the argument that Zionist is a protected class under Title VI of
Right.
And this was in reaction to you reposting something that Remy Kanazi, the
poet,
on the unfortunately named I don't like it when someone's name actually has Nazi in it. Spelling wise, it's not convenient for the cause, Remy.
As Ashkenazi Jews,
Ashkenazi,
we deal with all
we're Ashkenazi, he's Kanazi.
Yeah.
It's not helpful.
Yeah.
But solid Palestinian poet, voice, activist for many, many years. You reposted something he said about don't coddle the Zionists, don't cower to them, don't accept them in your spaces, don't normalize Zionism.
Right. You didn't write this yourself. This was something you reposted. And this was the basis for the Title VI complaint by the student at Hillel.
Which, I mean, I will say is deeply offensive as a writer. Like,
oh, yeah.
Like, charge me with something that I actually wrote. Like, I would love for to actually...
You want to get fired for someone else's shit. It's like you want to, at the very least, if you're getting, fired, you want to be able to plug the book that you got fired for because, yeah, it's messed up.
Yeah,
exactly.
if I was gonna get like executed, say over illicit materials, I wouldn't want it to be something I Xeroxed. I want it to be something I actually
wrote by hand
myself.
Yeah, exactly. So
getting arrested for a cover song. That's not fair.
I'm still pretty bummed out about that. But the argument of the school was that even though students, the college was not named in the repost, that it was implied that when I was reposting his words about not normalizing Zionism, that I was actually meaning that I was going to shun my students and keep them from coming into my spaces, which is quite the leap.
Yeah. It is an insane leap. And I mean, there's multiple leaps happening here. One is that based on your retweet or repost, that you are trying to institute, this anti-Zionist apartheid or whatever in your classroom. The other is to the leap of saying this is, anti-Semitic or that this is discrimination against a group of people based on their... I mean, it's like the identity of Zionist is something that people are now trying to turn into like a discrete and insular group that they can then, have the same sort of civil rights protections as, being a person of color, being of a specific religion, race, gender, creed, whatever. And it is... Yeah, it's just insanely offensive because it is anti-Semitism to equate Zionism with being equal to being the same thing as being a Jew. I mean, that's crazy to me. It's absolutely nuts.
Yeah, it's really wild. And it's, I think it's scary and upsetting in 100 different ways, but it's also incredibly infuriating to be a college professor who one of the things that I've been asking a lot is what are our jobs as college and university professors? We're not allowed to do our jobs right now. What are actually our jobs? But what I've been told as a person who has taught at two different liberal arts colleges over the past 12 years is that our job is to teach critical thinking skills. And what the administrations at these colleges are now doing is saying, actually, let's not think critically about this whole thing here, right?
Yeah.
Like, this is just, this special, zone in which we can't give any thought to it. So let's just play the game in which we say this political ideology is also an identity because a 20-year-old feels like it is.
Right.
Well, all political ideologies can become identities to the extent that people emotionally connect with them and identify with them. I mean, it can feel really elemental to who you are if you really are clinging to something. Like
Yeah.
the fact that things have a level of emotional, things start to feel personal
Right.
to the extent that you can't imagine yourself without it, and you don't want to have it criticized or but
Yeah, ask
Well-
any of the people in Jonestown, Guyana. You know?
Or like
They felt very
identify
closely identified with their particular ideology. Yeah.
I identify as an anti-capitalist, and I'm deeply offensive by everything about this country. But there's not that much that I can do about it except keep going to work or not,
Right.
and trying to like afford my unaffordable health insurance. So, you know, where's my form to complain?
Yeah. where's your right to exist? Yeah. What's interesting about this too is you know, in terms of what political ideology is protected and what isn't, is put loudly on display with this kind of stuff. You know, it's like you can't say, oh, you're getting fired for your political ideology because you discriminated against people who had a different political ideology. It's just you know, it's completely ridiculous. The campus Hillel that was going after you, they were openly advocating for the IDF. Is that right?
Yeah. So, I mean, here's a thing that we probably all know, but I think it needs to be said over and over again. Hillel Hillel was founded in 1923 as a Jewish organization, but beginning in the 1980s, it became an explicitly Zionist organization,
Right.
and has become increasingly more so. And, you know, so if you look at the Hillel International website, if you look at the Muhlenberg Hillel website, they claim and, you know, are required to sort of conform to Israel being at the center of their work, which inherently makes it not, you know, a welcoming Jewish organization at all, because there are so many Jewish anti-Zionists. But, you know, on the one hand, they have, appropriate to the podcast, something called a Hasbara fellowship, where you can go to Israel during the summer and like learn how to be a representative of Israel on campus, which is a whole thing.
Or he's a Hasbara fellow.
Or he's a Hasbara.
Exactly. But yeah, in the shared space right outside of a few classrooms where I was teaching, the Hillel students had put up these QR codes for 3 different Israeli organizations, one of which was the Red Cross, one of which was the IDF, and I can't remember what the third one was. In
Red
which
Cross
they
would
were
have been the Magen David Adom, like the
if I remember correctly.
It's actually the Red Jewish Star.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, the other cross.
Well, because you know there's the Red Crescent and
right.
Islamic country.
Right.
Yes.
And I was very upset about having myself and my students having to walk past this. It doesn't really set the right tone for education. But I had actually tried for weeks to get it moved or taken down. And the college was like, students can do whatever they want. And so I said, can I do whatever I want? Can I post about this? Can I write about this? And the provost said, yeah. And so I did. And I think it was 17 Hillel students then filed a complaint against me in which they felt unsafe with me in the building. And I guess an important backstory is that I'm an anthropology professor, and our department is the Department of Sociology and Anthropology, and we share a building with Hillel, and we share classrooms and space. So our department was the first floor, and Hillel was the second floor. And so for years, I used to joke that I was like literally holding up the Zionist agenda on campus because they were right upstairs. So I also was very much on their radar just because of proximity, in addition to teaching.
There's one thing we know about Zionists is they don't even want to be next to people who disagree with them.
Exactly.
That's why they ethnically cleansed you. Oh man. So can we talk about anthropology a bit and sociology and what you taught in the class. I think people would be interested to know the connections between those things.
And zooming out even a little further, if we can include that in the answer or get to it in the next one, where did your opposition to Zionism first appear in your own development, either as a person or a Jewish person or an American or an academic or a scholar? Like, how did you find yourself bringing these two things together to the point where to you they just go hand in hand?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we're always like creating our origin stories and like editing them. And so I don't know which came first or second, but I'll do the childhood one first, because I think that has become an origin story that makes sense to me, which is that I was raised in a Jewish community in the 90s in Washington, D.C. And so I was raised within Zionism. But I think as a young person, the Zionism that I was raised within was, and I think this is pretty common, was the complete erasure of Palestinians as existing at all, right? That there was, a land without a people for a people without a land. Yeah. Palestinians were never mentioned, except there were like people that didn't want Israelis on their land, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. And I don't even remember hearing about Palestinians when I was like in elementary school and middle school. I remember getting bat mitzvahed when I was 13, and a lot of relatives planted trees in Israel in my honor for my bat mitzvah, which I like feel like I need to do some kind of like reparative work around, because it was only years later that I saw the documentary, The Village Beneath the Forest, about the Jewish National Fund and the way in which,
by the way, just lost its charitable status in Canada.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yes.
That's crazy.
Yeah, we used to collect for that organization in Hebrew school. Yeah. That's when my father refused to put money in the little tzedakah box. That's when I started learning about this stuff. So you were getting bat mitzvah. You were learning that Palestinians conveniently don't exist to trouble your attachment to this foreign country. And at the same time, you're interested in peoples and you're interested in
But I mean, I think the interesting thing is like I was one of those kids who wouldn't stand for the Pledge of Allegiance in elementary school. I was like, nationalism is dumb and I'm not interested. And so I was like, why should I care about some other country on the other side of the world that really doesn't seem like a fun place to be? It just wasn't something that was interesting to me. I didn't want to have anything to do with it. I had a Hebrew teacher who had been in the Israeli military, and I didn't like her. So my first, first
association with Israel was the worst teacher
I was like,
ever.
well, I don't like these people.
This is coming, though. 20 years from now, American school girls will be standing behind, I pledge allegiance to the flag of Israel and the settlements for which it stands. And the hummus and the cherry tomatoes.
I will say, like, as an aside, there were so many things that I learned last week with Rashid Khalidi's interview. But the one thing that I wanted to say, wait a second, is that Israel does have a metropole. It's the United States.
Yes.
But I then, Israel was just this like backdrop that I had no interest in. But then when I was 16, I had a history teacher who was teaching a Middle East history class in high school, which is sort of wild. But it was like 1996 or 1997. Everyone was like high off the Oslo Accords. And he did this, like what I now understand is live action role playing, where he organized the whole class and the whole semester around a Mideast peace talk, and he assigned students to countries or entities based on power. So like 10 students were the United States, 8 students were Israel, 3 students were Egypt, and I was the one student assigned to be Palestine.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
This is
that changed your life.
It changed my life. It totally changed my life. Mr. Biedron, rest in power. And it was like, we had just gotten dial-up internet. I found a copy of Edward Said's The Question of Palestine. I'm sure I didn't understand 90% of it, but it was like, oh my God, I've been lied to my entire life, because there are actually people who were, in Palestine before the settlers. And it was this moment in which, first of all, education, it can be radical, but also it taught me that depending on where you situate yourself, the story, the history, the perspective looks very, very different. And so, is that what turned me into an anthropologist who goes somewhere, is situated with a community and tells a story from that situatedness with that community, which is not a global perspective. It's not a top-down perspective. It's not a both sides perspective. It's a sort of situational perspective. I think that was this really profound moment for me.
And it was this intentional by the teacher who was doing the Oslo LARPing was like, what was, you think that teacher would be like proud, or would it be like that one rabbi that we talked about who was like, we wanted you to be Zionists, that the one who's yelling
or was
at
it
people?
like, I see something in this girl.
Right.
She one day will be a fired tenure professor.
Yes. Yeah.
I wish I could actually ask him instead of speculate, but
Sure.
I'm pretty sure he was also like a Russian spy. I think he was a communist. He was the first person who assigned me Marx. He also taught this Russian history class where you start and like, he's the czar and everybody's a serf, and everybody has to like kiss up to him to become a noble person, and then
he assigned you to be
happens.
Lenin.
Yeah. So I had a very political education at my like public high school. And I do wonder if Mr. Biedron knew. There were a lot of Jewish students in that class, and I do wonder what it was like for the students who were assigned Israel.
Right.
I can't remember who they are. If you're out there, let me know.
Assigned to Israel at birth. That's good.
I think that's all of us.
We could really change the way the far right feels about gender if it was assigned Israel at birth.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, we'll continue with along this line of questioning, but first we do have to have a quick ad break. I'm sure the UJA has some more things to sell us, or whoever our advertisers are going to be this episode. But please stick around. We will be right back. And we're back. This is Badass Hasbara, world's most moral podcast. We're here with Maura Finkelstein. And we were talking about how you grew up, in terms of with Zionism, within a Jewish community, and how you kind of slowly came to a sort of political consciousness that said, hey, Palestinians exist.
And then eventually to an academic discipline called anthropology that's about peoples and about understanding what makes a people and how you. So yeah, can we talk a bit more about how you would then weave your consciousness, I guess. I was going to say your views, but it's more your consciousness around Palestine into your teachings on anthropology.
Yeah, thanks. I will say there's a reason why Israel has been targeting and assassinating what I think it's now 195 Palestinian journalists. There's, and here in the United States, the sort of like larger narrative is that you can't trust Palestinians, whether it be writers, thinkers, artists, etc., right? Because they're biased. Whereas, who's in control of power, who's control of narrative, we know because of Hasbara that, Israel is in control of our narrative here in the United States. And so I think, realizing that if I'm reading Palestinian writers and they are telling a wildly different story than the one that I'm, being sort of force-fed. And I was a contrary kid. I have memories of going with a mentor of mine in high school to protest at Lockheed Martin.
Cool.
And learning about, global weapons production and just thinking about, I do not trust those with power. I was raised by hippies. And, if the powerful narrative is that there are no Palestinians, and then I'm reading Palestinians who are actually, let me tell you about, displacement and ethnic cleansing and land theft and murder and genocide. Who am I going to believe? In this country, we're taught that, distrust Palestinians. But of course, if you're actually reading their words and listening to Palestinians, it's really hard to make
Right.
the argument that anything that Israel is doing is moral or just at all.
Yeah, that's why people actively avoid it. I mean, we talked about this tweet, from this student at Columbia, Shoshana, who had to check with Canary Mission before entering a class that in a subject she wants to major in, like Middle East studies, but wants to be protected from having to read something
Right.
that you can only do that kind of denial for so long before you continue just reading and kind of coming around. So
Yeah.
she wants to check with the people who watch out for teachers, and the Canary Mission tells you, who you can trust and who you can't. It's crazy.
Right. Which is funny because Canary Mission, I think, is really bad at their job. Like, I'm actually deeply offended that I'm not on Canary Mission. So she would, I guess, feel that my classes were totally fine.
Yeah. Damn. Yeah,
But I mean,
I've wanted to be on Canary. There's just so many lists that just me and Daniel are both not on that I'm just like, what's wrong with us?
yeah,
We
aren't
weren't
we
even
good
in the
enough?
top 10 anti-Semites of the year.
Yeah, and we've been doing everything in our power, to just try, but they just don't, they just won't legitimize us.
Yeah,
which
and
is a
there
form
aren't
of
really like
anti-Semitism.
participation awards. You're
Yeah,
either on the list or you're not.
I know it sucks. Yeah, but go on. Yeah, please.
I mean, I'm not a scholar of Palestine. I say that because I've been to Palestine, but I haven't done long-term, anthropologists go and they live somewhere for a year or two, if not longer. And I spent 2 years in Bombay doing research in India that also was part of a tenure project of being in India a lot. And so that's sort of where my research was. But, when I was learning about Indian history in graduate school, in order to have context, I was reading Indian scholars who were not saying that, we should be legitimizing the British Raj and listening to their version of this story, right? It was like challenging that. And I wrote a book about mill workers in Bombay. I spoke to the mill owner, but I wasn't interested in like presenting his side as a balance to, worker lives, as though he had anything to say to counter the stories that they were saying. So we see
Right.
this embedded, the situatedness in all of these different spaces in which nobody's ever come to me and been like, your book would have been a lot better if you had like spent half of it thinking about how the mill owner justified, not paying his workers.
Right,
But
yeah.
Palestine continues to be the state of exception here.
Yeah, it's interesting the fair and balanced argument, which used to be almost exclusively a conservative argument. That I feel like a lot of people of more like liberal sentiments would mock. This idea of like showing both sides of being fair and balanced. I mean, it was a constant trope making fun of Fox News, and yet it seems to be the accepted, narrative when it comes to Israel-Palestine, to a degree that is ridiculous. I mean, we saw that interview with Ta-Nehisi Coates on CBS this morning, in which he said, the interviewer, Dokopil, I believe is his name, was saying that his book was anti-Semitic because it didn't
It was
point out
one-sided, yeah.
the other side of the Israel-Palestine situation, which is, completely ridiculous because he just went there writing what he saw.
And he
Yeah.
said the perspective that you're articulating can be heard on any network at any time, all the
Right.
time. It's actually hegemonic. If the both siders actually meant it, that would be one thing.
Yeah.
Then they probably have to admit that there aren't just two sides. There's many, many sides to thinking intelligently about any issue. But they never actually want both sides. They want to shut down the side that's currently speaking from speaking,
Right.
which doesn't usually get to speak. I have a question that I hope is anthropological in nature,
Let's see.
that I never took an anthropology course. And it's got to do with, when does a people become a people?
Mm.
Clearly, Israel knows that the Palestinians are a people because it's going after the institutions and organs of culture that make that people a people and systematically destroying them. That's part of what makes this a genocide, right? The hospitals, the universities, the schools, the cultural institutions, the religious institutions. When we had Rashid on, Professor Khalidi on last week, he made a point that's not very popular among pro-Palestine solidarity activists, I would venture to say, which is that at a certain point you got to deal with, and he's written about this extensively too. You don't have to like the way Israel came about. You don't have to like Israeli culture. You don't have to like Israelis. But at a certain point, somewhere along the way, this nationalist project fused with a settler colonial project succeeded to the point that a new people, a new nation, has now come into being.
Right.
One way or another, by hook or by crook. Kind of they've been Frankensteined into existence, and now you have modern Hebrew and a culture surrounding it, and literature and poetry and people who were born there, and cultural memory and a national identity and all this kind of stuff. And you're just simply, there is no mechanism to erase that. There is no, you can't press reset. Right. You can't press the return button on the typewriter and just go back to the beginning. What's your view of there's a book, right? Shlomo Sand, The Invention of the Jewish People, which was very controversial, but the notion that we had to invent a peoplehood for ourselves in order to launder and justify this project. How do you deal with that when you have, on the one hand, a people that is being wiped out by another group calling itself a people, and that second people that's doing the wiping out is the product of its own supremacist project? It came into being by dominating and by settling and by invading.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there's so many different ways to answer that question. And I think, Israel's not that old, and Zionism hasn't been around that long. I mean, we're not talking about, these extensive histories, but I like to think about Israeli culture through the appropriation of food. So the fact that 90%, I made that up, I don't know, a majority of Israeli food as like an element of culture is actually Palestinian, Lebanese, whatever food, that Israelis have done such a powerfully and skillfully good job of claiming as their own. I was visiting my family in suburban Washington, D.C. this weekend, and went into a coffee shop to just get a cup of coffee and realized very quickly that it was actually an Israeli cafe, in which there was cake, the round flatbread, and it was described as a Jerusalem bagel. There was labna that was explained as Greek yogurt. There was hummus and falafel, and all of these things being described as Israeli food. And it was so, I was infuriated. Yeah. But also this, this isn't the sort of slow development of something new. Through encounter and through time and history or whatnot. It's this product of a sort of both settler colonial space, and also this sort of intense assertion of a cultural identity, which we can make arguments about the way in which foodways have always been shared, but the sort of erasure of Palestinians while also stealing, za'atar, and claiming it as an Israeli spice. I think, exactly. We've seen that making the rounds.
What is za'atar? The Israeli spice you will want to sprinkle on everything. This one felt the most offensive because everyone was like, come on, man. That one started a whole round of people just posting hot dogs and goes, hot dogs, the Israeli food that'll make you go, what is this sandwich? Yeah. So
come on. Israeli food is borscht.
Yes, Israeli food is borscht, and all sorts of different Ashkenazi food. And I feel yes, there's this is a sidetrack, but when it comes to Jewish culture and Israeli culture, I feel like there is an almost open hatred for European Jewish culture, or at least culinary culture, certainly diaspora culture in general, when it comes to the way that diaspora Jews are portrayed and mocked.
You ever had an Israeli latke?
Oh no, I've never had an Israeli latke. Any good? Terrible?
Don't even want to talk about it.
Oh wow, that's just crazy to me.
They sometimes will. I mean, it's fine. It's some kind of fried potato thing. They'll put it in a pita, like in a falafel or with hummus and things like that. Like, but it ain't that thin, crispy, golden fried.
Right. That's why they hide it in someone else's food.
That's right.
And of course, that's not to say that there aren't
Zionism is basically one big game of hide the latke.
Yeah. I mean, and we've said this before, but it's not to say that there isn't, of course, years and years of Middle Eastern Jewish culture, sprinkled throughout the Middle East and North Africa and whatnot. But it's very the distinct you see in the way the distinct attempt to make it's a concerted effort to appropriate Middle Eastern food and just slap it, Israel in front of it. I mean, it's funny because it's what Israel did to Palestine in as it's a microcosm of that.
Right.
That's why people bring it up so much. Also because they like to brag that everything is us. That's what the theme song is about.
The worst neighbors ever, like totally fine, just sort of hanging out in Palestine, being, living their lives. And then all of a sudden, what if all of this was ours?
Yeah, exactly. It's like that neighbor that asks you for a bowl of sugar. And then, and then they're like, are you going to say thank you? And they're like, what do you mean? This is my sugar. This is what
well, there were Palestinian Jews who were very nervous about the advent of Zionism too.
Oh, 100%.
They knew this was going to mess up the balance, the equilibrium, and the whole spirit of the place. I need to establish a buffer zone in your pantry, says producer Adam. Exactly.
Yeah. But continuing on with this question of personhood, I feel like what interests me about it as well is the fact that we've got one group of people, Zionists, and who
personhood or peoplehood?
Yeah, peoplehood, not personhood. Good point. You've got Zionists, nationality, right, and which doesn't exist in terms of Israeli is not a nationality. Apparently, it is Jewish is what they have on their, I guess, citizenship papers or whatever legal documents.
ID cards, yeah.
Yeah, it's very specific to Jewish, the Jewish nation, and there's been talk about people saying that kind of people have been confused by the idea of Jews as a nation, I think, for a long time. And sometimes that discourse gets pulled into this Palestinian solidarity discourse where people want to deny Jewish peoplehood, the Jewish nation in general. And it's always been, I think, for me, a sticky subject because I'm not an academic. I don't know anything unless it's a prestige TV show from 20 years ago, then I know everything about it. If it's Mad Men or Sopranos, let's say. But if it's about anthropology, I know nothing. So can you explain what makes a group of people a nation?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I do think it's interesting that Israel has never actually declared their borders because, borders are such a way in which nationhood is created.
Sure.
But I do think
why limit themselves?
Right, yeah.
Exactly.
You're just boxing yourself in.
We're seeing what that looks like in practice in Syria and Lebanon. And, there are probably anthropologists who will disagree with me, but I think national identity is the sort of imagination of oneself as having not just a homeland, but a homeland that's political borders determined in the logic of the nation state. And so, I will say that, I'll preface this by saying I'm an American. I realize that my, national identity is, imperial, it's racist, it's Zionist, it's all of these things. I'm not out here pretending.
Oh, you mean
like
I can tell the Zionist who was about to run into the room being like, does Maura know she's American? I can tell him it's cool. She knows.
Yeah, we know.
We know. That one always comes.
Yeah.
I know there's
Are you
always
aware
like the,
you're
but
on
what
stolen
about
land?
Yeah.
Right. Very aware. But I think that like Israeli culture and Israeli national identity is a genocidal identity.
Mhm.
And I think that that's, not necessarily, I know lots of critical anti-Zionist Israelis. And, we can talk about identity versus, national identity, et cetera. But I think that the idea of an Israeli national identity being something that has to be a theocratic ethno-state
Yeah.
is pretty telling in how this notion of Israeli is imagining itself, because there is actually a version of the future in which everyone is living, I think that the biggest threat to, the world is the nation state and capitalism. Yeah. So I don't imagine just futures through a different kind of nation state.
Sure.
But there is a less genocidal version of the nation state, which is an inclusive, democratic, country, which of course any Israeli who opposes that is opposing that because of the assumption that they will do to us what we have done to them, which is a genocidal ideology that is not shared by, most Palestinian thinkers and writers and people that I know and read.
Right.
So I think that that's telling on itself.
Yeah, I mean, it's an inherently racist assumption, and it is telling on yourself, of course. But it's like this idea of Arabs not being able to handle liberty, not being able to act responsibly with their own liberation, and therefore we need to keep the boot on their neck is just, that's been the justification for continuing apartheid, continuing, colonialism. This is just, it's always the justification. People just act like it's different this time because they can look back at a history of Jews being oppressed throughout Europe, and they say like, well, there's precedent for assuming that if we allow ourselves to live within a minority, and live as a minority in our own space, that we will be holocausted, and and I think it confuses the issue for a lot of people because of this vast history of Jews being oppressed.
And as for Israeli identity itself being fundamentally genocidal, that I think is that's buttressed by when you listen to anti-Zionist Israelis who have really confronted the consequences of their own identity, and they really decide that they're on the side of dismantling the systems of violence and apartheid. They end up kind of not being able to even speak the word Israeli in the same way anymore about themselves, whether it's our former guests, Alon Nissan-Cohen and Elik Harpaz, who now introduce their One State Solution, or Yalla podcast, I forget what it's called, by saying we are
Jewish Palestinians,
Jews born in Palestine, or with Israel on our passports. Jonathan Pollock, who said in accepting an award in his speech, he said, we don't need to just be anti-Israel, we need to be anti-Israeli. That my own Israeliness is an impediment to me being able to stand where I need to stand to do this kind of work. So that when those people themselves take a look in the mirror and they say, this identity actually can't come with me on this journey towards being pro-justice or pro-humanity, that's pretty telling, I think.
Yeah. And I think we're so limited in our imagination because we learn how to understand identity through these frames of national identity or national belonging or whatnot. And so we circle around these same conversations over and over and over again, when actually the job of, teachers and writers and artists and, you know, all kinds of knowledge producers, which you two are also part of, is to imagine.
What?
I know.
No.
I know.
Hell yeah.
Sorry.
You're emotionally damaged.
Is to imagine a world otherwise. Like, that's what we're supposed to be doing,
Yeah.
is to actually like step into the work that's often very uncomfortable of interrogating all of the forms of violence that we've accepted as normal reality.
Right. And
are
if I
completely
think
unnecessary.
about what, you know, how many fingernails of mine would you have to pull out by force before I relinquished my identity as a Canadian, or maybe someday if I ever become American? No, you can, like, it would be an adjustment. It would definitely be an adjustment because it's just a fact that I was born in a place called Canada.
Mhm.
But emotionally, I don't subscribe in the depth of me in any way that my Canadianness or my North Americanness, or there's very little about me identity wise that goes to that you'd have to pull up by the roots by force. You know, when you're a member of a society like a national identity like Israel, it's a much more painful extraction, I think, to try and get people to give that up, because they get a certain amount of power, privilege, and the illusion of safety from it. And these are very emotional things.
Yeah, I think that that's really real. And, you know, on a lighter note, I think for American Jewish Zionists, it's so confusing for me because it's like, it's hard enough to labor under the weight of one national identity. You want two?
Yeah,
Like,
Right.
really? You want those two, like, fraught histories, like,
Right.
weighing your shoulders down?
yeah. Good point.
What a choice.
Yeah. Yeah, it is interesting too to see, I think when it comes to American Jewish Zionists, being put in a position in which like their Zionism has been activated, you know, in the last year, I think has been it's been interesting to watch, because you see a lot of people who you see the depths to which they are emotionally tied to, you know, to Israel and to Zionism, and how far they're willing to go, you know, in order to defend a state that they themselves before October 7th were very critical of. Yeah, it's a complicated thing, you know, identity, and I think that like when people talk about the Jews being a nation or not being a nation, or like the, you know, I haven't read Shlomo Sand's book, but you know, the invention of Jewish people. There's a lot that can be said, and there's a lot that, you know, needs to be looked at carefully, and I think I'm always weary to talk about it, because everyone is so individualistic when it comes to their own personal identity, and I'm not trying to deny anyone's you know, like lived experience, but it's hard to not look at everything through the lens of my own, which is, you know, I'm an American Jew, but I'm a white guy. And I don't go around identifying as I'm white, you know. I don't like walk into a room like white guy here, but it informs, you know, my you know, my view on things. And so watching people deny the white part of themselves, the one that actually makes a material difference, in order to paint themselves as an oppressed people, you know, white American Jews going around being like, would you hide me? It's just, I can't help but mock it, because I'm just like, what the fuck are you talking about? You are not someone who is being actively sought by the state or police, or
Yeah.
Or dealing with even close to the amount of like discrimination as the very people that you are targeting, you know.
And the thing is, rights are like this. You have the right to, like, your rights are as uncomplicated as they don't affect the rights of others. Your identity is as your prerogative as it doesn't impinge or place demands upon the material, as you just said, Matt, material realities of others. And the question for all of us is, okay, well, I can feel however I want to feel about myself or
Yeah.
my group. Who has to suffer and die or not have their rights ever come to fruition and be kept down by systems of overt and more elongated, more invisibilized violence,
Yeah.
so that I can keep feeling the way I like to feel about myself?
Right.
Whose reality has to be suppressed so that my unreality can be maintained as the only one? And this is where it leads towards the work of academics like you, who can think and speak in these terms and help us orient to the unspoken and unseen things.
Well, and I think the interesting thing is that, identity, cultural, ethnic, racial, national, like these are often very ambivalent spaces of identification because they change over time, right? They're not
Right.
static.
No.
They're the borders are constantly being made porous and remade again. And I think just thinking out loud, there might be something really seductive about Israeli national identity
Sure.
in that it resolves the ambivalence because you are both the most extreme victim and the most powerful entity at the
Yeah.
same time.
Yeah.
So you can actually inhabit those two positions at the same time without ever confronting
Yeah.
both like the implications of those positions and the impact that they have on the world. And so, I think about how the result of that is not just the like complete dehumanization of Palestinians to the point in which, they're human animals, right?
Right,
But also
right.
the complete annihilation in order to be both the most powerful and the most victimized
Right.
at the same time. And,
And if you think about it, the most moral equals most powerful plus most
Right.
victimized.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
right. Yeah. That's a good
Critical
point.
morality theory. I like that. That's good.
Right.
But I interrupted you.
No. I just, I think about how, I don't spend a lot of time trying to empathize with those who I feel are, enacting genocide or supporting it or whatnot. But
Sure.
that must be a very devastating and exhausting position to be inhabiting and to be like constantly like, maintaining those boundaries.
And I think trying to empathize with it every now and then is healthy. I think it's healthy for us, but I also think it's intellectually healthy. It keeps your understanding of it from getting too brittle or too rigid. And the satire that we do on this show, whether it's that that song that played earlier or the songs that Matt's written and stuff, we have to get inside the minds of these characters to try and understand, well, what is that logic? And it's never just an intellectual logic, it's an emotional logic.
Right.
And that's what's driving everything. It's not the opinions, it's not the takes, it's not the facts. It's a much more lizard brain thing. And so yeah, I never make it mandatory that anyone should empathize with anyone.
Right.
But I recommend, if you have the bandwidth, to just assume for a second that people are getting something out of their ideological position. What is that?
Right.
What are they getting out of it? And I try to extend that to the monsters of history too.
Yeah.
It's
also a good way to know people's vulnerabilities too, because when you know someone's vulnerabilities, then you can fight them a little bit easier. And the big vulnerability here is it's important to know why they are able to hold these two beliefs that make absolutely no sense put together, and that way you can, at least in my case, you can make fun of them because you can hit them where it hurts. At the very least, they can see themselves as ridiculous as I'd like them to see themselves. And also, I think it helps in general in terms of like helping you sleep at night a little bit more. I mean, I think it's been almost therapeutic for me to try to come to some emotional understanding, even if it's with a total ghoul. It helps me to sleep at night knowing that it's not just everyone's evil and like pining for blood. There are those people But I can't think like that, or else I wouldn't be able to fucking move.
Right. And I think, when Palestine is free and between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea is like a free, inclusive, democratic Palestine, which is not quite liberation, but it's, a step in that direction. And Israelis find that if they're willing to live, in, I'm wary of the word peace because I think it's often like a cover for, different forms of inequality,
yes,
but live side by side with the people that they have completely, dehumanized and turned into terrorist monsters, the entire Israeli psyche will collapse. And I think that fear is probably a deeper fear than the fear of Palestinians.
Oh, yeah.
That there's no center to hold. There's no reality to the, cage of identity that is, only possible through the complete destruction and dehumanization of a people. And, I don't think most people are up for that reality, especially if they've built their identity around this notion of, us or them.
Well, reality has a way of asserting itself. Fortunately, unfortunately, just inevitably, right? And it's just not happening fast enough or it's happening in ways that are brutal along the way. And that's this podcast exists to entertain people in the meantime, and it's a fucking horrible reason to exist.
Yeah. We actually don't have, as a podcast, the right to exist.
No, we don't have the right to exist.
We do anyways. But yeah, so I think that kind of gets me to a point that I want to get with more guests, which is like, especially now that things are getting more and more bleak. We talk about what's the eventual freeing of Palestine, and if there's one thing I've learned over the last year doing this podcast is that it feels like I'm going to have to do this podcast for a lot longer than I wanted to. And but I try to, in some way, remain optimistic. And you don't have to do this for me, Maura. But if you feel like giving me a reason to be optimistic, Christmas is coming up, which is the Jews' favorite holiday in America. How can we feel optimistic in these dark times?
Yeah, that's as you note, that's a really tricky question, because I think in terms of Palestinians in Gaza and the occupied West Bank, and now folks in Lebanon and Syria. In terms of the horror of genocide, ethnic cleansing, and now what is looking like a quote unquote regional war. The numbers of people that we are watching murdered in the most horrific ways, and increasingly so every day, make it, sorry, there's a car alarm. I'm in New York. Make it so that
that's a Hillel
I feel like
car alarm.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a
Call the
truth
police. Make it so that I actually I want to sort of bracket my optimism with the acknowledgement that, what I see as, a place to be optimistic has nothing to do with people who are, on the verge of absolute destruction. And I never want to lose sight of that. I think in terms of this country, the place in which I do allow myself a little space of hope is that, I'm middle-aged, I guess. I'm 45. I'm of an older generation that, I think has been complicit in fucking everything up. But when I look at young people, when I look at students, when I think about the student encampments and the things that students are still willing to do and risk now, and the way in which attention on Palestine is like I've never seen in my lifetime. I think that if we're thinking long term and we're willing to sort of bracket the fact that this optimism has no bearing on the folks in Gaza who are just being slaughtered every day, I think that the sort of long history of this is that we have a younger generation who is completely unwilling to go along with the status quo in ways that my generation has been. And I think it's Palestine. I think Palestine has revealed a lot about the way in which the United States operates as a global power. But it's also about the fact that they're all going to be in incredible amounts of debt. They are never going to dig their way out from, student loans. Their, options in terms of careers is very small. The environment, everything that we're seeing in terms of, the cost of healthcare, the cost of food, the cost of everything. Young people are pissed.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping that anger and that sort of, connection between the unlivability of being in this country and the unlivability on a global scale is going to connect in a big enough surge that we're going to see some kind of large scale change, which I would love to see as the collapse of the United States and Israel. And a sort of like future that is far more just than this contemporary moment. And I think that our young people are showing us what that is, which is why I think teaching is such a gift, because it means no matter, I keep getting older, but I'm still able to learn from young people. And I'm still trying to find ways to do that, even though I'm not in the classroom. So that gives me a little bit of hope.
Well, so speaking of that, and thank you for that. That's a beautiful answer. What's next for you? And what's the latest in your case? When I saw you a few weeks ago, there was like an appeal hearing happening. How did that all go? And what are your plans? Like, are you going to go back to teaching anthropology? Are you going to have to get a job selling furniture at Anthropology? Sorry, that I just constructed that.
I actually applied for a job at Anthropology when I graduated from college, and I was like, I was an anthropology major, and they were like, I don't care.
But the joke was good.
A company that doesn't realize
how good of a joke
that is doesn't deserve you.
I know. Absolutely. I was like, and you spelled it wrong. Yeah, so I can't say too much about it, but I'm going through an appeals now. And the thing that I will say is that what we're seeing, whether it be, at Muhlenberg College, at NYU, with these recent persona non grata situations, across the country, is that the places in which we're seeing the most repression of faculty, staff, and students, but, for my case, faculty, is when the administration is acting as the sole adjudicating body and making decisions outside of faculty governance. There's a reason why colleges and universities have some form, even though it's been eroded over the years, of faculty governance, because faculty understand the stakes for higher ed in a way that administrators who are at the whims of donors and, other people who are providing the money are not. And so, I think that from my perspective, the thing that needs to be strengthened across the country is a sort of support and expansion of faculty governance, even as administrators are trying to erode and destroy it. So I have a shred of hope that even if I'm not reinstated, that there's some awareness of what administrators are doing in order to silence dissent on campus, in order to not alienate their donors. We should all be very worried about that, which is why, we need to bring back robust, federally funded, free public education. In terms of what's going on with me, I'm waiting to hear what's going to happen with my job. I'm
Does
trying
tenure
to write.
transfer in any way? Like, is there any world in which a sympathetic institution might be like, all right, she was put on waivers, we're picking her up off free agency, we're signing her?
Yeah, totally. And if you are that institution and you have that job, call me. Yeah, if you have tenure, you can apply for a job and go with tenure if the institution is willing to honor that.
Cool.
Doesn't always happen, but it can, and it does. It does sometimes.
You don't have to do another 10 years.
Yeah. So stupid.
So stupid.
But yeah, I mean, I don't know, I don't know what's going to, provide me with, a salary and health insurance, but I do know that the work that I've been doing is the work that matters the most. And when I could do it in the classroom with my students, that was a gift, but that is not the only place in which we're doing this work, obviously. And I've gotten, there are no silver linings to genocide ever. And I wish that I didn't have these opportunities because I didn't need them. But I've been able to talk with a lot of faculty and students around the country these past few months. And it's teaching me and it's helping me think about, what I think is important and what, how I want to be creating alliances and what I want to be thinking about. So I've had the opportunity to connect with people who are doing really great work, and I'm learning from them, and that's been nice.
Well,
and hey, we all know each other as a function of all of this. Yeah.
Yes, we all, which is a nice thing, is the network that has sadly been expanding of people who are in similar positions and suffered similar consequences. But it's nice that we at least can hang out and talk about how it's all fucking bullshit.
And I think it's really it's been a really clarifying year in all of these ways, but also a nice reminder that there are people who are willing to give up things because the stakes are so high. And change doesn't happen if you don't give up things, and power never rewards those who resist power. So, being connected with people who are willing to actually act in alignment with their theories and talking points has been a great privilege for me.
Well, it's been a great privilege to talk to you here, Maura. I'm so glad
for having me.
That we got to have you on.
We are now truly the world's most Maura podcast.
Yes. So you have a book out there called The Archive of Loss. What is it? Lively Ruination in Mill and Mumbai. Did I? And
you did? Yeah.
We if anyone's looking to support you and to read something that they're going to love, please go to our description. You will see a link for that book in the description of this episode. Maura,
can I make a quick plug?
I was just about to ask.
Yeah.
Yes,
so one of the things that I've encountered a lot over the past year is that people are waking up, they're learning, they want to be more informed, and there are really incredible resources out there. And one place to learn, to read, to take classes is Workshops for Gaza. Workshops with a 4, and they're doing really incredible work. They have these wonderful classes with incredible writers. They have reading groups, they have workshops, they have lectures, they have all sorts of things around engaging with liberation work and Palestinian thinkers and writers, and it's entirely fundraisers for mutual aid in Gaza. So they work really closely with the Samir Project and others. And so if folks want to stay connected, if they want to learn, they want to read, go to Workshops for Gaza, sign up for their workshops. They're incredible. And all of the money goes directly to folks who are providing food, shelter, blankets to folks in Gaza.
Cool. And we'll also put the link to that in our bio as well.
Thank you.
As well as maurafinkelstein.com. So people can go. Why not? You got a website? We're plugging it.
Yeah. I like to rant and then publish things.
Hell yeah. Same. Maura, once again, pleasure having you on. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you so much. It's an honor.
And thank you all so much out there for listening and watching, or whichever way you're doing it. Patreon.com/badhasbara. Please send us emails at badhasbara@gmail.com. Thanks everyone again so much for listening. And until next time, from the river to the sea.
Let's find Maura a better university.
Yes.
Of all the homes that e'er I bombed, I have bombed them out of self-defense. Oh, and all the children that e'er I killed, it was, alas, at my expense. I've tried my best to explain myself, but my best efforts were doomed to stall. So close for me my embassy. Good night, goodbye, and feck you all. Of all the lies that e'er I told, my love of Zion made them true. Oh, and all the pushback that e'er I got, 'tis all because I be a Jew. Yet all my memes and self-pitying tweets, they've failed to hold you in their thrall. So close for me my embassy. Good night, goodbye, and feck you all. Of all the guilt trips that e'er I laid, they never seem to land with these. And for all the historical comparison cards that e'er I played, I could not gain your sympathies. Well, I have learned with Irish folk, Hasbara is a task too tall. So close for me my beloved embassy. Lehitraot and feck you all, you Egypt gobshite, cute whores, scarlet figure mothers for having ya. L'chaim shlanta, good riddance.